Dr. Lott, thank you very much for joining me today on this Simple Coach to Coach Athletic Director interview. Really do appreciate you taking the time and us figuring out the logistics, which I wasn't clear about. But thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So I was actually, I always have a hat, something on E3, and I actually thought about wearing my alma mater Mount Union gear all up and down, but I didn't want you to feel that uncomfortable, so I just.
Well, I see Marietta there. I don't know if that's much better. But.
Yeah. Well, this is one of my favorite, believe it or not. So, and I don't have any Otterbein gear to wear. So hey, why don't we just start out? Like, I'm always curious because in my sort of craziness, I've always applied for jobs that I have no business whatsoever applying for. So I have been known to apply for some athletic director jobs. I'm just curious, how did you end up at Otterbein? Sort of, how did you end up becoming an athletic director?
Sure. I knew that I was always really passionate about the place of sport in higher education and trying to use sport to help, young adults grow and develop and help become the human that they want to become. I just didn't know exactly what form that was going to take professionally. And so I've had a little bit of a winding road to get here. I spent some time as a professional athlete, some time as a coach at the Division I, Division III levels in track and field and cross country. Went back for my PhD, did some research, and really developing through the sport experience, experiential learning, just looking at how certain competencies are developed through sport and why that doesn't happen consistently and what we can do to make that better. I landed in a faculty role right after that, and that soon morphed into part faculty, part administrative role at a different institution, and just started doing more in the administrative space and was able to help found an institute that was based off of my research. And then the opportunity at Otterbein just kind of came about. I was getting to the point in my career where I felt like I needed to go one direction or the other as far as either faculty or administration was concerned. And I just knew that I wanted to be at a place and in a role where I could really make a difference kind of in those areas that I described. And so, when I was first approached about the Otterbein role, I just wanted to make sure that I could do the kinds of things in this role that I was really passionate about and that it wasn't solely going to be kind of an ops role. And after those conversations and meeting the people on campus and learning about what they were really looking for, it became something that was really appealing. And so luckily it worked out.
So the other institution you were at, if I read your history, was at Denison.
Yeah, that was my last institution.
That was your last. Yeah, that's where you founded the institute, I think, right? And and then and you were sort of split between the two worlds.
Yeah.
And you talk about this. You're trying to figure out this. You're at a crossroads. I mean, did you come looking at Otterbein, or did Otterbein come looking at you, or was it
probably a little bit of a mix?
Yeah.
I knew some people that were over here and had some preliminary conversations before I applied.
Yeah. So I got to ask one of my favorite questions is, has anything surprised you so far about being at Otterbein in comparison to your old world?
I mean, it's very different kind of an institution. But I knew what I was getting myself into. I've known people at Otterbein in different capacities. Just the close proximity between Otterbein and Denison. Our student athletes competed against each other regularly across all sports. I'd been on campus multiple times. I mean, my oldest son had gone to basketball camp here a few times. And so I had met some of the people, and I'm also just a higher education geek. And so I spent countless hours just learning about different institutional types. And I'm always looking at all the different kinds of rankings and just, I'm very interested in what makes institutions tick and how they use sport and what they're like and all these kinds of things. And so I felt like I had a really good handle on the OAC and on Otterbein and what this role would be like if I was to step in it.
what is it, just from your experience? What do you think the difference between Division three institution is from an, I'll just say from an athletic standpoint and the athletic experience that you just sort of mentioned, versus maybe, let's just say, because everyone looks to Division one, like what do you think is the biggest difference there?
Yeah, people ask me this a fair amount, surprisingly. And I always talk about that, there's probably as much interdifference between Division three as, interdifference. Um, I've seen some Division three institutions that really just almost treat it as kind of a roll the ball out and see what happens type situation. There's a lot of part-time coaches. There's not a lot of resources. I mean, everyone, at those places still takes it seriously, but um, it's just vastly different than other Division three institutions where you have more comprehensive staffs and resources and serious recruiting and so like I've just seen drastic differences within Division three. I mean, we're looking at 440 different institutions. Places that have no endowment, places that have $1 billion endowment, places that have history of national champions, places that have never won a conference championship. So you could just imagine that there's just substantial differences there. Um, I've been at two different Division One institutions. So I've coached at Valparaiso University and Army West Point. In both cases, they're on the smaller, more academically focused side of things. I have, done graduate work at Canisius and at Ohio State, and so I've been more adjacent to those athletic departments. Um, I think like I'm not going to say anything drastically different than you've probably already heard, but it does seem that at most Division three institutions, student athletes are able to, at least in the ideal way, look at their experience as a co-curricular endeavor. Um, and so it can be a point of balance. And ideally that they're looking at it as part of their educational experience. So it's not something that they're trying less at. It's not something that's less important, that there's less passionate about, or anything like that. It's just almost like a mindset, and that it's something fun. It's something that's part of the development. It's something that they're going to put everything into, but that they're going to have it as a balanced portion of the rest of their life. With a lot of athletes that I competed with at the professional level, or athletes that I've worked with kind of in a sports psychology space, at some programs they feel as if um, their athletic experience dictates the rest of their life, and they have to work everything else around that. And so, I mean, if we're just going to step back at that 10,000 foot view, I think that that's probably the biggest difference. But once again, I just see so much differences within Division three or even within Division one. I mean, the cadets that I worked with at Army West Point are so much different than the experience of the Buckeyes.
I always, just from all the conversations I've had with all coaches, I sort of come to the conclusion that I think there's an equal commitment by and large, right? Like you said, there's a variety within Division three, but I think holistically the idea is that um, the athlete is still going to compete and do the things necessary that an athlete is going to do. They just so happen to have an equal commitment and the ability to focus on that other side, which is the academics, right? Where it's not, the athletics is not all consuming. And I think that's,
Yeah.
yeah. And again, that you can pick schools where that's not the case. That's not the case. But I think by and large, that seems to be where I think Division three really has the benefit, right? Like if you want both sides of
Yeah.
the equation. So
Well, something that I'm able to work with Division three athletes on that I can't work with Division one athletes on as much is helping them understand how to prioritize
mm-hmm.
all the different things that they care about. So, like I said, so many Division one athletes that I talk to, they feel like, well, this thing has to just really strongly influence how I go about everything else.
Mhm.
Versus, I can talk to Division 3 athlete and say, look, if you want to make sport your number one priority, that's fine. That's your prerogative. You've just got to be aware that you're doing it and it's got to mesh with your values.
Mhm.
There are also Division 3 athletes that academics are clearly number one. They love their sport, but you're here for an education. That's great too. If that meshes with their values, go for it. It's also okay if family's number one, religion's number one, whatever it is with that individual. But I just feel like that at most Division 3 institutions, the student athlete has the ability to figure out their value structure and come to
Mhm.
terms with how they want to prioritize all the important parts of their life.
Yeah.
And that just happens in a different way
Mm.
than you experience at a lot of D1s.
Yeah, yeah. Very That's interesting. This is an odd one. How am it we all in context of all that, how important is winning to you?
I think striving to win is absolutely crucial because for me, the absolute most important part of being a collegiate athlete is your own development as a human through that experience. And so that's about learning about yourself on just a visceral level, what makes you tick, why, how you're able to succeed, in what areas do you struggle and why, and how you can work towards that. And likewise, how you understand the perspectives of different individuals, oftentimes people that come from vastly different backgrounds, how you can read their emotions, how you can work with them in pursuit of some kind of a common aim. Now, if you are just doing that just for fun, the likelihood of that growth and development just isn't as strong.
Mhm.
When you're putting everything into it and it feels important and you're just dedicating resources, and there's that chance for success, you're going to have a different kind of growth and development.
Mhm.
So I think that it's crucially important for people in my role to try to put the athletes in situations where they can win. Um, Now, does that mean they're competing for a national championship in every sport every year? No. That's fun, but I think I've seen how experiences can be very different on teams that are, consistently mediocre and you don't have those same kind of expectations to
Mhm.
figure out how to really function at a high level within those programs versus the culture and the expectation of we're striving for excellence in all that we do. Um, and once again, that can be prioritized,
Mhm.
but it's still pushing and trying to win and trying to be great and trying to grow. And I think that that's just crucial.
Mhm. Did you in that i- in being excellent in everything you do, ha, was there anything that you've done? If I recall correctly, just looking at your bio, you started at Otterbein in 2023, so you're relatively new, right? Like you're
Yeah,
still,
I'm finishing my first academic year here
yeah,
right now.
you're
Yep.
you're 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 still a rookie. Um, is there was there something you did? Is there something you've done in the last year where you've again sort of went for, hey, the I always say winning is the outcome of everything else you do, and really can't predict the win and loss, but you can predict the other things that you're doing. Is there
hmm
anything you've done to sort of, I don't want to say improve, but formalize that pursuit of excellence across all the athletic programs?
Yeah, but I also think it's really important as a leader that you don't just come in and you tell everyone this is how it's going to be. These are my beliefs. This is my philosophy. You all better get lockstep, behind
Yeah,
that.
you'd be a popular
Um,
guy.
exactly, right? So, I mean, right off the bat, when I got here, we had lots of conversations as a staff about what is it that makes Otterbein special? What is it that you're all trying to do within your programs? What do you care most about? And we were able to, I think, come to some type of an agreement and formalize what we really wanted to do in our department. And this is an ongoing conversation, or at least it should be, right? It shouldn't just be a one and done, write it up, stick it in a binder and put it on a dusty shelf. But but it's something that you engage with consistently. And so, as we've had monthly staff meetings, we always do these breakout conversations and we talk about ways that we want to enhance our culture and talk about ways that we want to alter our student athlete experience and things like that. But also, we've dived in right away in the student athlete and the coach development space here. I mean, that was something that was just really important for me to implement. And so being able to have exercises with the coaches to where they're thinking about ways in which they want to grow and develop, and they learn ways in which they can become more consistent in those areas that they've already said are really crucial to them, and then hopefully through that practice be able to help facilitate that same kind of growth with their student athletes. So kind of going through those mechanics and working on the science behind some of that has been important. Having those initial conversations and then helping to frame what the student athlete experience can be and should be is really important. And so I just make sure that whenever I speak to groups of students, to groups of coaches, I'm always saying the same kinds of things and talking about how important the learning and growth is. I just talked to our 4-year senior athletes. We just did a big dinner celebration. I think I said something along the lines at the very end of, like, the wins are great, but what I truly care about is that when you graduate here, you can look yourself in the mirror and know that your experience on the golf team or volleyball team or football team ultimately has helped you become the human being that you want to become. And so really just being, very outspoken about that. But first, making sure that everyone understands kind of where I'm coming from and what I believe, and trying to incorporate all of their values and hopes and all that good stuff too.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I'm gonna switch over because I thought it was very interesting. So the reason we connected for anyone who's watching is um, I had done an interview 6 months ago with Sarah Odie, who is
Hmm.
the commissioner at the Ohio Athletic Conference, which Otterbein is a part of, and she actually pointed me in your direction about your mental health community, and that there was you just did an event, and I guess to kick it off with students, and let's just start. Can you just talk about the mental health community that you've organized
Yeah.
at Otterbein?
Yeah, so it's called the Cardinal Mental Fitness Community, and it was something that we were able to get initiated as we came back to start the spring semester. So we did our kickoff event in January, and it's actually something that I've been working on with a clinical sports psychologist named Steve Grafe for the last 3 or 4 years. It was something that we had just noticed that in large part, student athletes look at sports psychology in more of a reactive way when they are struggling with something, when things aren't going well, like, ooh, give me this fix. Like, I'm in a hitting slump. What is it that I need here? Maybe I need some mindfulness. Come give me some of that so I can get out of my slump, right? Um, and and so we've noticed a lot of that. We've noticed this just uptick in people struggling with navigating their experiences really since the pandemic. Just a lot of mental health concerns. And, the data shows this too. This isn't just anecdotal observations. Um, so there's really, an obvious need. And then finally, in the Division III space, there's really just not a lot of resources in sports psychology. People will oftentimes bring in some kind of an external consultant to do a program or something like that. And it's a one off, and I'm not sure that there's really much benefit. Maybe a nice idea that someone can try to work with on their own, but I just don't know how much of a difference those kinds of things really make. And so Dr. Grafe and I just really were trying to put our heads together. What makes sense? What's feasible from a resource standpoint, and obviously financial, one, but two, just time, because student athletes are busy, and while some people want to dedicate time to their mental game, others, it's, like I said, more of an afterthought when they feel like they really need it, and not something that they look at as, proactive practice the same way that they would develop their physical bodies or their strategy or technical abilities or things like that. And so um, what we landed on was a way to proactively develop psychological skills. And we've had Dr. Grave. He came in person for the kickoff event, and then we've done 7 virtual sessions since, where we open it up to anyone in the student athlete community here at Otterbein. Some coaches have required certain sessions or strongly encouraged them. We've had watch parties where whole teams come in on a session. Others, it's just been more kind of individuals scattering across the sports. Um, but what's really unique about our program is that we've worked with coaches and student athletes to figure out topics and areas that they think are really important for their success. And when I say success, I'm talking about holistically, not just on field. And we use the Zoom sessions as kind of this initial educational moments. We break them out into breakout groups and things like that so they can discuss how it really applies to them. And then there's follow up. We've got this database that only our student athletes have access to that will almost give step by step instructions for if you really want to engage deeper in this area, here's how you go about it. Like, here's how you could actually work on becoming more resilient day in and day out by doing these 3 things. And so, our coaches will be able to work with our student athletes in that space. They've had that initial education, and then there's the follow up in a way that they can engage deeper. And so we've provided other articles and videos and things like that if they want to hear it in different ways. But more importantly, I think it's providing the student athletes with a platform that they can practice these kinds of skills. They can work on actually increasing their competencies. And so what we're really trying to do is lay this foundation with all of our student athletes so that we can come in and do subsequent work. So if I come in and speak to them on mindfulness, they already have that basic understanding. Some of them have already been practicing them, or maybe a team has already jumped in and said, this is what we want to focus on, and they've put a lot of work into it. And then if I hire someone else to come in that I've vetted, or you have another coach work with them, and that if they have a lot of experience in that area, there's already that understanding.
Yeah, yeah. And there's already that foundation, right? Like, it's nothing. I don't want to say worse, but um, when you have somebody who's a speaker and they're speaking about a topic that everyone's just sort of glossy eyed, like, I don't know what you're talking about, and right, it's not applicable or what have you. I'm just curious, in knowing your academic background. I mean, is this something? This is hard. Maybe it's hard. I don't know. Is this something that you're tracking now? You're looking at, I'll just say, at your athletes I'll just say, in a different way. And hey, we started here in a year. We were here in a year, in another year, and that you're able to sort of look at that way, or
Yeah. And so I actually kind of started doing that work with my dissertation,
mm-hmm.
where I was looking at emotional intelligence levels or emotional and social
Yeah,
competency levels of student athletes and how that changed throughout their experience if we just looked at it organically. Because we say all these things happen,
yeah,
right? We say like, oh, you participate in sport, you learn how to be a great leader, you learn
yeah,
how to connect with other people, you learn it. Yeah, sometimes,
yeah,
not with
right.
everybody, right? And
It's-
so I wanted to get data to
yeah,
show that, and so yeah, I started tracking that as a doc student, and we
mm-hmm.
were working with it at Denison within the institute, and so yeah, I've been developing
Mm-hmm.
ways of looking at that. And I think a next big step for us at Otterbein, um, something that I'm really passionate about, but I don't really feel like has been implemented anywhere before, where part of a coach's performance evaluation is actually going to be tied to the concrete learning and growth that we see within their student athletes. And
Wow.
so I'm just trying to figure out the absolute best ways of consistently measuring this and being able to measure it equitably and consistently so that it really can be part of that evaluation. Because as of right now, even places that truly care about that, they still will only look at, maybe athletic director observations, student athlete surveys, won loss record, maybe retention rates and team GPAs, and maybe like fundraising metrics or something like that's thrown in. But I mean, it's just very like status quo. This is how we
Yeah.
assess coaches. Um, but especially at the Division 3 level, if we truly care about a coach's impact on educating, developing their students, and that their athletes come in here and end up better prepared for life, success, and whatever that looks like, then I mean, we've got to be able to measure that. And we've got to be
Yeah.
able to hold them accountable for that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was speaking, I forget who this is, a while back when we had just come out of COVID and we were, with the pandemic and things were getting back to normal. And it's a year out maybe of when everything was locked down. And someone one of the coaches that I interviewed made the observation that, before COVID, I was a X's and O's guy. I'm the trainer on the field. I was the, hey, doing whatever the requirements of the job are. And then I suddenly became this psychologist, therapist, right? And, and that hasn't stopped. And which tells me it was probably something that was much needed before, but it just needed a catalyst to materialize to.
Yeah,
And
that's a great way of saying it.
yeah, like and as somebody who's had, you know, who's dealt with mental health and or the lack thereof, um, and all the pressures of the world, like I've always thought that for the longest time, especially in the collegiate atmosphere where you're bringing in these, I mean this respectfully, right? Like um, immature kids at the front end, and you're trying to churn them out as mature adults at the end, and there's all this noise in between that they have to navigate. I think for the longest time it was up to the kid to navigate and dodge and
Yes.
weave, and especially with the preponderance of drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's something that's very, very much needed. And I'd love to see other schools sort of do the level of work that you're doing, because I only think it makes them better, right? I always
Yeah.
wonder. I've sort of put these things into camps. I'm on a little bit of a monologue, so I apologize. But I put
Totally
things
fine.
into camps now, 55 years old, and I don't have time for, I'm like, what benefits and what helps me? And I focus in on those. What does not help and does not benefit me, I put those in another camp and I quickly dismiss them. I'm like, I'm done with you,
Yeah.
right? Like, um, but I don't think kids think that way, and I think they need whatever guidance they can. So,
But you also make a really good point about the coaches and what's needed and then what we ask of them
mm,
now. And this is part of why I'm so passionate about coach development. And whenever I talk about coach development, it goes hand in hand with coach support because um, we can't expect our coaches to be psychologists if they've never been trained to do so. And if you look at all the coaching development things that are out there, sports specific things that are part of us, different kinds of associations and licensures and whatnot, it very much is technically based, the X's and O's, the game strategy, things
yeah,
like that. And maybe there's a sprinkling of some other things in there, but for the most part, now like sometimes an athletic director or vice president or a president will come down hard on a coach or a program if there's some certain kind of issue, whether it's like a behavioral issue or if there seems to be, I don't know, a lot of members of their team that are struggling in certain ways. Um, and unfortunately, coaches can lose their jobs over it, and sometimes it's out of their control or they haven't been
yeah.
trained
What do
for
they
it. And
know?
yeah,
Yeah,
and and so it's so important that we help our coaches feel like they're not on an island and that they're equipped to try to navigate just the litany of things that they're asked to do.
mm-hmm. Very good, Coach. I know I mentioned this to you before. Let's take this over to Patreon, where I have a small community that supports the things I'm doing on all things Division III soccer. If you're okay with time, we'll meet up. And for everyone who's watching, hop on over to Patreon, and you'll see the rest of this interview. For the rest of this interview, hop on over to Patreon and become a member of All Things Division III Soccer, a community of supporters that are as fanatic about Division III soccer as I am.